When watching the game, most people's eyes basically just follow the football around the screen. And this is fun for big moments, but you're missing out on so many fascinating things happening elsewhere. So in this video, I'm going to immediately make football more fun for you to watch because I'm going to show you exactly what to look for. Starting with number 1, personnel packages. Personnel packages are the positions that are on the field for a play. Let's focus on the offense. There's 11 players on the field. 5 are always going to be linemen. 1's going to be the quarterback, which leaves 5 remaining players that are going to be some combination of skill players, running backs, tight ends, receivers. The personnel package is described with a 2-digit code. The first digit is how many running backs, the second digit is how many tight ends, and then we just have to do math to figure out how many receivers. There's technically 15 different combinations of personnel packages that can be used, but more than 80% of NFL plays are called out of 2 personnel packages. A specific thing that you can do when watching games is before the snap, count how many running backs, tight ends, and receivers are on the field, and call out which personnel package they're in, because this is going to give you clues about what the team's strategy is. This is going to be a new way of watching the game, and it might feel a little bit like homework at first, but I promise you, after a few games, you're going to start to pick up on it really quickly and start to spot patterns. These are the top 5 most frequently used personnel packages for average NFL teams. You can see 11 and 12 are the most common, with more than 80% of NFL play calls being in these 2 personnel packages. But there are a few teams like the Ravens, 49ers, Chiefs, and others who utilize personnel packages in a very unique way compared to average teams. For example, the Ravens use 11 personnel about half as often as a typical team. But interestingly, they use 21 personnel more than 3 times as frequently as typical teams. 21 personnel is 2 running backs and 1 tight end. This might be surprising for casual fans to hear, because when you think of the Ravens, you think of Derrick Henry. He's their number 1 back. They're not a team that has 2 running backs that they use equally, like some teams do. But you'd actually be surprised to know that both Henry and Justice Hill, their second running back, have pretty similar snap counts. In their Week 1 game against the Bills, the offense had 51 total snaps. Henry actually ran the ball 35% of those plays, and Justice Hill ran the ball just 4% of those plays. However, their snap count, the plays in which they were on the field, Henry was at 57, Hill was at 45. Pretty similar. This demonstrates that Hill is actually used more often than maybe you realized. The Ravens also used 22 personnel, more than any other team in the league. 2 running backs, 2 tight ends. An average team will run about 2% of their plays out of 22, the Ravens about 12%. Similar story here, you probably think of Mark Andrews, who is on the field for about 75% of the team's plays. But in Week 1, Charlie Kolar, their second tight end, was on the field for 61% of their plays. Probably never even heard of Kolar, but he was on the field more often than Henry was. Last year, he only had 9 catches, 131 yards, and 1 touchdown, because receiving is not his role. He's there to block. The 49ers call about 83% of their plays out of 2 personnels, 11 and 21. Their most frequently used is 1 running back, 1 tight end. This is possibly because of Kyle Shanahan's heavy influence of the West Coast offense philosophy, which uses more short passes instead of runs. So heavy multiple tight end formations are less common, but also due to the team's personnel advantages. Last year they had Deebo Samuel, who is a large 215-pound receiver. Most receivers are about 200 pounds, so he's bigger. He's effectively a tight end. They also have McCaffrey, who's an incredible running back. He's a receiving back. He can act as a slot receiver. They have these players who can act as multiple positions. This versatility allows them to essentially call plays that would normally require 2 tight ends or 4 receivers, but they can call them out of 11 personnel. This is important because they can keep the same players on the field with no substitutions. Nobody gets a rest. They can keep the tempo up. They can keep the momentum going, and it makes it more confusing for the defense what's actually going to happen. But they also use a lot of 21 personnel, just like the Ravens, although the 49ers are the team that uses it more than anybody. The main reason for this is their use of Kyle Juszczyk, their fullback. They're one of the remaining teams who actually uses a fullback on their roster. He does get some carries, but he's primarily used as a blocker. So because they have this really talented player on their roster, they leverage his strength. They build their team's scheme around the strengths of their personnel instead of just trying to force players into a rigid scheme. So when you're watching the 49ers, keep an eye out for 2 running backs in the backfield. The Chiefs are interesting because they use a couple personnel packages that a lot of teams don't use that often. The first one is 12 personnel. So this one is used pretty commonly, but the Chiefs use it almost twice as often as typical teams. 1 running back, 2 tight ends. So of course we all know about Kelsey, but they also have Noah Gray, who's a really effective blocking tight end, but also he's getting more reps in the passing game as well. Kelsey is used on about 84% of the team's reps. Noah Gray is used on about 41%. Next time you watch the Chiefs, instead of watching Kelsey, take a look at Noah Gray, number 83, and see how they utilize him in both the running and passing game. But one thing the Chiefs do very different than most teams is the use of 13 personnel, 1 running back and 3 tight ends. This is really interesting, and I've got a really good example of how they use this in week 1 against the Chargers. We'll look at that in a second. I've put every team's personnel packages into a 2025 team guide, which also breaks down specific things to look for when watching those teams on TV. So you'll see the game in a totally different way. Links below for that. Another thing to do is look for odd personnel based on the down and distance. This could be an indication of something interesting about to happen that the average fan might not expect. For example, let's say it's 3rd and 8. Most people would expect to see a pass, but you notice the team comes out in 21 personnel with 2 running backs, which is a little bit weird. You'd expect to see more receivers. Maybe the reason for this is because the team's about to run a screen play, and so they've got more running backs in there to block. It could also mean that they're preparing for a deep shot, and so they're adding more blockers on top of the line for max protection to give the quarterback more time and to allow the receivers more time to develop their routes. Now you're starting to get into the territory where you can predict what might happen next. This is where football becomes really fun to watch. Here's a play from the 49ers using 22 personnel. We've got 2 running backs in the backfield, or a running back and a fullback in this case, 2 tight ends on the left end. They motion the fullback into the backfield, and then they run a pass play. Before the ball is snapped, we notice that the defense has 7 men in the box. That means there's 5 linemen on the line of scrimmage, and then there's 2 that are within 5 yards directly behind them. This is pretty balanced, not leaning heavily towards run protection or pass protection. When defenses see 22 personnel, they often might bring an extra 8th man into the box to help with run support because 22 personnel is often used for running plays. And if they were to do that, that would have to be one of the safeties, which right now there's 2 safeties in the backfield playing what appears to be a 2-deep coverage. So if they did bring the safety down into the box to protect against the run, we now only have 1 safety deep in the middle, which could indicate a cover 3 formation. The play call has a receiver running up the right seam, which is a cover 3 weakness, which is a really interesting and smart play call. And it appears to be Purdy's first read too, after the ball is snapped. What I think they might have been trying to do here is use this 22 personnel to bait the defense into using cover 3 in order to make the box heavier to protect against the run, but then actually call a sneaky pass play that exploits a weakness of that cover 3 in the seam. However, the defense ended up playing cover 2, so Purdy had to go to his second read, which was this Texas concept, which is where that initial seam route clears the linebacker in this curl route. He has to follow him before passing him off to the deep safety, which opens up room underneath for McCaffrey to run this angle route across the middle. It's kind of an innocuous play, but I think it's a good example to showcase some of the strategy that goes in behind the scenes. Now, spotting personnel tells you who is in the play, but what really decides the outcome is where they line up. The shift from personnel to formation is where you start predicting what's about to happen. Formations. Formations are where the players line up before the snap. There are some rules about how many players are allowed to touch the line of scrimmage and how they must line up in order to be considered an eligible receiver. But the main thing to look for are, number 1, how many receivers are on each side of the field? Are there 2 on the left, 2 on the right? That's a 2x2. Is there 1 on the left, 3 on the right? That's a 1x3. And also, how close are they together? Are they huddled close to the ball and there's nobody wide? Is the tight end attached to the line of scrimmage? What you can start to do is observe what your team seems to use a lot. And if you really want to take it to the next level, try to notice which formations they use in certain down and distance situations. A good example of this are the Bills. One of the formations they use involves having 2 receivers on one side of the field and 3 on the other, either a 2x3 or a 3x2. On early downs, first or second down, they use these formations about 8% of the time. But on late downs, third and fourth down, that increases to 20%. That's kind of interesting. Why might they be doing this? A couple advantages of this. Number 1, you've got 5 receivers on the line of scrimmage, compared to a lot of formations where you might have 4 or maybe 3 or even 2. With 5 receivers on the field, it forces the defense to respect the passing threat. Also, with 5 receivers, they're likely going to have to be spread out across the entire width of the field, which makes it more difficult for them to disguise what they're doing. If the formation is condensed and everybody's lined up pretty close to the center of the field, the defense is able to kind of disguise what their intentions are and maybe stand in different positions that don't suggest what their assignment might be. But when you're spread out wide, that's a little bit more difficult to do. Another reason the Bills might do this is because it forces the success of this play on their best player, Josh Allen. It gives him 5 receivers. What they're likely going to do is have quick passing routes, and he's going to have to read the play, find the open guy quickly, and make a good choice, which he can do consistently. They're leveraging that strength. The third reason is with this empty formation, with the defense lined up wide, it's also going to cause the box to be lighter. You're going to have fewer defensive linemen and fewer linebackers on the field. So when the play is snapped, Josh might actually have a lot of open space in the middle of the field for him to just run up and gain yards and perhaps a first down. The Eagles use a 2x2 formation 54% of the time on early downs, which is more than any other team in the league, where the average is 43%. Next time you watch them, take note of that and ask yourself, why might they be doing this? Each of these formations has different advantages. So here are a couple things you can look out for when you see them on the field. With 3 receivers on one side, there's usually one on the other side all by himself. And this is usually where teams like to isolate their star wide receiver. This forces defenses to move more of their coverage towards the trips side of the formation, and it gives more space for that isolated wide receiver. This is great for teams who feel very confident about the matchup between their receiver and the defense's cornerbacks. Trips also stresses coverage rules. If the defense is playing cover 2 with 2 high safeties, generally speaking, the 2 cornerbacks are going to be playing the flat zone. Each safety is going to play a deep half. And then the linebackers in nickel corner are going to cover the hook zones in the middle and then the curl zones outside of them. But overloading receivers on one side can create conflicts. If you have 3 receivers running a route combination on one side of the field where there's only 2 defenders, of course there's going to be one receiver that's always open. One of these receivers can run deep to take the safety, one can run into the flat to take the corner, and the other could run a deep sail route and be open in between those 2 zones. It's going to put either the safety or the corner in a difficult situation where he has to choose to cover one or the other. It's an impossible choice. With bunch formations, it can cause confusion and congestion because the receivers are lined up so closely next to each other. And if the receivers are running crossing routes in front of each other, the defenders can run into each other. We call these pick plays or natural picks. The offense is intentionally creating congestion and traffic so that defenders are unable to play tight coverage on the receivers, allowing the quarterback to make a quick completion and give the receiver an opportunity to maybe break a tackle and run up the field for some extra yards. It's also tough for defenders who like to play with leverage, meaning they'll line up slightly on the inside or outside to try and put pressure on the receiver and prevent them from running a route that they think they might run. But with so many people in the same area of the field, there's so much traffic, it makes it difficult for that leverage to be executed effectively. Condensed formations are where receivers line up usually closer to the offensive line instead of being out wide near the sideline. The Ravens are an excellent example of this. Take a look at this play against the Bills. The formation is condensed and Lamar RPOs out to the left. The reason this is effective and why the Ravens play a lot of these condensed formations is because Lamar is fast. When you have a quarterback who can outrun defenders, he could potentially just run to the sideline and get an edge around the defender. But another advantage of condensed formations are crack blocks. So this is where the tight end or receiver lined up on the edge of the line gives a quick block to a rushing defender from an unexpected angle before proceeding to run his route. It's a tactic that might buy the quarterback an extra half second. These formations are also great for play action, fake runs that are actually passes, because it looks like they could be runs, and teams have to respect that, especially because they have Lamar and Henry. So as long as they're running the ball effectively and getting yards, teams are going to have to respect that, and it's going to create more opportunities to pass the ball down the field. And because the Ravens have built their entire scheme around these heavy formations with multiple running backs, multiple tight ends that are condensed, it's very difficult for the defense to anticipate what's coming because everything looks very similar. Empty formations are where there's no running backs in the backfield. So you'll have either 5 receivers or maybe 4 receivers and 1 tight end. A casual fan might look at this and think, oh, this is absolutely going to be a long, deep pass, but that's actually often not the case. Empty formations are common with air raid style offenses. I made a video on offensive philosophies if you want to learn more about that. But basically, it's about short, quick passes. But another big advantage of empty formations, like we talked about before, are QB draws. Take a look at this play from the Commanders in week 1. Jaden Daniels is using an empty set in the red zone, and there's only 4, maybe 5 players in the box, which is really light. Like we said before with the 49ers, when there was 7 players in the box, that's pretty balanced. 6 is starting to get pretty light, so in this case, this is very empty. So as long as he has a bit of a gap between 2 of his offensive linemen, he can rush up through the middle and capture some pretty good yards. And that's exactly what he does here. Let's look at a couple fascinating plays from the Chiefs' week 1 game against the Chargers. Early on in the game, they come out in 13 personnel, which, as we learned before, is not too uncommon for the Chiefs, but is very uncommon for typical NFL teams. 3 tight ends on the field. This is the first time in the game they're using this personnel and formation, and it's a gap run. You can see when the play is called, the left guard and the tight end don't block the people in front of them. They pull across the line and block on the right side. The running back then runs through this 4-hole, and it's a small gain. Also notice here that it appears to be a cover 3 look from the defense. There's 1 deep safety, and immediately as the ball is snapped, the 2 corners start backpedaling to play the other deep thirds. It's a pretty innocuous play with kind of an unremarkable result, but it's the play that the Chiefs call later in the game that's really interesting because it builds on top of this. A few drives later, the Chiefs come back out in the same personnel in the same formation, except this time it's flipped. Chargers again come out in a single high safety look, and what I think is happening here is that the Chiefs are calling a play that they think is going to take advantage of a weakness of cover 3, because that's the coverage they saw the last time they called this personnel and formation. First of all, they motion the tight end across, which to them confirms that this is zone coverage. Instead of running that gap running play like they did last time with those 2 pulling blockers, this time they switched it to what appears to be a zone run to the right. Notice the offensive line all shift laterally to the right. This is a zone blocking technique, which we talked about in the run scheme video. Mahomes drops back, gives a handoff, but it's a play action, a fake handoff, and he bootlegs out to the left, and he runs to the sideline and gains 5 yards. Well, in cover 3, the 2 cornerbacks who are on the edge of the field both play a deep coverage, so they backpedal to make sure that they're playing those deep responsibilities, which means that this flat area of the field is usually open. If the Chiefs were correct, this flat zone is going to be open and create enough space for Mahomes to get some pretty good yardage with his legs, which he does. The result is not spectacular. It's not a massive play. It's not a play you'll see on the highlight reels, but it's a good, safe yardage play that showcases strategy that teams will build over the course of a game where they'll use the same or similar formations and play this chess match between coordinators.